What if my boss or my employer decides to not fill out the DWC-1 form? Am I stuck as an injured worker?
I haven't had an employer refuse to sign. However, I would suggest if the employer is trying to evade that, or let's say the person isn't there, I would probably suggest that the injured worker make a note on that form. So-and-so is refusing, so-and-so is not returning my call, or send it by email to the employer. And even if they don't sign it, that email would at least prove as evidence that they were notified.
Yuvanna, thank you so much for joining us on Work Comp Talk. First of all, welcome. I've never had you on the show.
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so before we even get started in today's topic, which is the importance of a DWC-1 form, and we're going to pick your brain just like I pick Bilal's brain every single time. Tell me a little bit about yourself. So how long have you been a workers' comp attorney for?
For about 8 years now.
8 years. Why this profession? Why this part of the law? Why not family law or criminal justice in that sense?
So I do have a background in dentistry.
Wow.
I was in dental practices for about 21 years, and I wanted to merge my knowledge and passion about medical reporting and medical records and what patients go through with the law. And
Right.
so here I am in workers' comp.
Interesting. It's the teeth that started it all. And you have beautiful teeth, by the way. I have to admire those beautiful teeth. Tell me a little bit about what's your favorite thing, I guess, about being a workers' comp attorney?
Just kind of in general, helping people in this trying time in their lives, right? Because they are vulnerable, they're in pain, they don't know what to do, they're not working oftentimes, they're not making a lot of money. And so being able to just help them in that time of need is what I really like to do.
I like that. I think it's a very beautiful part of being an attorney because at the end of the day, you're advocating for someone who really does need the help. These are injured workers whose lives change, and not only theirs, their families, they have kids. It's like, depending on their attorney, and there are some attorneys, it's a life-changing experience for sure.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us. So I'm excited. As I mentioned earlier, we are going to go into one of the scariest situations most injured workers will face, which is getting injured at work, right? It's a very scary situation. And what makes it even worse is not even knowing the rights, not even knowing the process. It's not like you're going to be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to go and grab a workers' comp for dummies and figure out what the law is so that when I do get injured, I know exactly what to do. It's like no one ever even thinks that it's going to happen to them. That's why it's called an accident. So based on the fact that you've obviously been a workers' comp attorney and you do this as a career of choice, I want to ask you, what is the most important part to even get a claim started? What's step number one when you get injured at work? So tell me about this DWC-1. Where do I get it? What is it for? What do I need it for? Explain a little bit about what this looks like.
Okay, so it's a one-page form, and it officially notifies your employer that you have suffered a work injury or illness, and it's what gets the workers' comp claim process started.
Interesting. So I'm assuming the employer would give this to you?
The employer is supposed to give it to you. Technically, by law, once an employer is informed that a employee suffered an injury on the job, they are supposed to give them that form within 1 business day. Now, that doesn't always happen because employers don't always know what they're supposed to do.
Right.
And even when they do know what they're supposed to do, they don't always do it. And so an injured worker, though, shouldn't rely on the employer giving it to them. And if they're not given that form within the next day, they should get the form themselves and fill it out.
Okay, so when you say get the form, can I just Google this? Can I just type in DWC-1 form on Google? Is this something that I can find online?
Yes, you can find it online. You can also call the DWC or work. There should be someone available called the Information and Assistance Officer, or INA for short, and they will provide the forms to the injured worker as well.
Okay, so once I have this form, do I mail it? Do I I don't know. I guess you said it starts the legal process, but what if my boss is not the best boss? It's a shady boss, because we've had some cases. I don't know. I go and get the form myself. Is that a red sign? Like, hey, this is not going to go as smooth as it should? Or what if I'm in a coma and how the hell am I going to fill out this form? What are my options then? Sorry, I know I threw a lot of questions at you. So I guess what happens if I don't get this form the day after? Am I in trouble?
So you're not necessarily in trouble. However, I've seen time and time again where that form wasn't filled out, and later on it's used against you because you didn't fill it out. And that could be perceived as you having not reported it to the employer. If the employer says, I didn't know about it, they never told me, and there's no document, which the form would be that document to prove that they were informed, or if there's a dispute as to how they were injured or the body parts that were part of the injury, then without that form, there's nothing to kind of corroborate what the injured worker has been saying probably since day one.
Yikes, that's kind of scary, because technically this form is a make it or break it type of thing. So let's say you get injured at work, you get sent to the hospital and emergency room because of the, I don't know, severity of your injuries, and this form never gets filled out. Am I liable for that money that I have to pay to the hospital if I never, I don't know, reported it?
You could be. I mean, it kind of just depends on the employer and how forthright they want to be. Now, if you, before you went to the emergency room, let's just say you told your employer, hey, this is what happened. I'm injured. I really need some medical attention right now. And they say, yes, go ahead and go to the emergency room. You go to the emergency room, and the emergency room department later on contacts the employer. Hey, we were told this was part of a work injury. If the employer doesn't want to be honest, they can say, nope, they didn't hear about this. This was not a work injury. And if it's a he said, she said type of thing, then the emergency room, what they care about is being paid. So they more than likely will bill the injured worker until that gets worked out.
Shoot. Okay, so filling out the DWC-1, super important. What are you entitled with this DWC-1 form? Like, in order for you to get X, you need to have this form. What is X?
So in general, if an injured worker gets hurt on the job, they should be entitled to California workers' comp benefits. Those would include temporary disability, permanent disability, medical treatment, and sometimes rehabilitation or vocational training.
Okay. So it's, guys, super important to fill out the DWC-1 form. As Yuvanna mentioned earlier, if your employer, for whatever reason, which it does happen, does not give it to you, there are ways for you to also obtain the DWC-1 form. I know for Pacific Workers, which also happen to be our sponsors, by the way, if you obtain our services to represent you as an injured worker, technically we can also file this DWC-1 and get the whole process going. We can send it to you and all of that stuff. So you're supposed to get it from your employer. You fill out what part is there anything, kind of like, I'm a mom. So there's sometimes when you do physical exams on our children to play sports, a doctor fills out a certain part, we fill out a certain part. Is that form similar to that? Is there a part that your employer fills out versus you, or is it all just the injured worker?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there's one part, the top part gets filled out by the injured worker, and it has basic information, their name, I believe it might have, or ask for their date of birth, but it certainly asks about how were you injured and what body parts were injured.
Okay, that's important.
I believe it does ask for some information like social security number and things like that for identification purposes. But then the other half is filled out by the employer. And that's usually done by someone in human resources or a supervisor that might have been the one that it was reported to.
Mm-hmm.
That could be the one to sign off saying that, yes, this injured worker
legit.
Reported it to me.
Okay, cool. So based on my notes, because guys, I did take a lot of notes. Obviously, there's a lot of information that happened within the DWC-1 form. What if my boss or my employer decides to not fill out the part? Am I stuck as an injured worker? Like, I'm assuming there's cases where employers deny it even happening, and then they don't fill out their part. Then what?
So I can see that happening. I would think, though, if you're filling out your part of the form and you're going in front of a person, human resource or the manager or the owner of the company, and you say, here you go. Yeah. I was injured. I filled this out. I just need you to write in your part, sign it, and please give me a copy. I don't, to this day, I haven't had an employer refuse to sign. However, I would suggest if the employer is trying to evade that, or let's say the person isn't there, I would probably suggest that the injured worker like make a note on that form. So and so is refusing, so and so is not returning my call, or send it by email to the employer. And even if they don't sign it, that email would at least prove as evidence that they were notified.
Oh my God,
and
we
they got it.
always talk about this paper trail. So Bilal and I always talk about the importance of creating some sort of paper trail that you have evidence that you either texted them or you sent out this form, etc. And it's so important to have this out there, because that was going to be my next question. So let's say you do send it out to them. Do you get like a message back, a receipt? Like, how do you know that they did their part and you're relying on them?
So an employer, again, should know, and what they should do upon receipt of getting that form, they should sign it and give a signed copy back to the injured worker. Now, again, that's to show and to prove that the employer had noticed. So if an injured worker fills it out and sends it to the employer, even if the employer doesn't sign it, as long as there's that paper trail, like we said, and we can show whose email address it went to, that it actually went to, a manager or an owner, not just a random, colleague or coworker, even a text message. Sometimes people communicate with their bosses via text now.
Right? Yeah, that's a thing.
And so if they even take a picture of it from their smartphone, send the text message to their boss. Hey, boss, remember when I told you I fell and I had to go to the emergency room? Well, here's this form. I filled out my part. Now I need you to fill out yours and send it back to me.
Okay.
Okay.
That makes total sense. So any tips you can provide an injured worker as to some of the things they should, I'm assuming it's a simple question and answer type of thing, but some of the mistakes maybe that you've seen in the past that come back and bite people in the butt.
Yes.
Please share. Please share. I'm telling you, I am going to pick your brain on this.
I want anyone and everyone to know this part. Okay. On the form, where the part that says, describe your injury and which body parts were injured. Now, it's a fill in the blank.
Okay.
Might be two lines or maybe 3 lines, which isn't a lot when you're describing something major that happened. But what I see happening over and over again is it's not descriptive enough. So a lot of times injured workers won't list all of the body parts that were part of that injury.
Oh, shoot.
They leave things out all the time.
So say, for example, someone gets injured on their shoulder, but they're also getting pain in the elbow, but they only say, I hurt my shoulder. It's very important to, even if it's the minimalist amount in your elbows, still specify it. Or maybe if you scraped your knee, who knows, maybe later on you're gonna have issues with your knee. So descriptive to the T.
Yes. Anything and everything that you maybe had an impact on. So you fell on your left side. Okay. Most people will only put on the form the injured body part that hurts the most, right? And what's giving them the most aches and pains. And then later on, they have problems with other body parts. And the insurance company points the finger back at the injured worker and says, you didn't say that on the form.
Oh my goodness.
You didn't list it there. And it takes months for a doctor to maybe get involved in the case that can resolve that dispute and say, yes, it was actually more than just what was listed for whatever reason. It wasn't on the part, of the injured workers, not their fault that it wasn't on there since day one for whatever reason.
Right.
But the point being is it can take months to get that corrected. In the meantime, the injured worker is going without medical treatment to those extra body parts.
Yeah. Damn, that sucks. And it was going to be my next question. Why is it important to add these things? But you pretty much answered is it's important because in the long run, then you won't get the medical care you need for those specific body parts. So would it be safe to say that it's don't leave any parts blank on the form itself?
Don't leave any parts blank. If anything, overdo it, whatever, even if, like you said, you might not immediately feel a big impact on, let's say, the elbow, but you should still mention it. So when I said, for example, you fall on your left side, list the different
Which body area
that were impacted in that fall. So if you fell and it impacted your shoulder, your elbow, your knee, your ankle, list all of those things.
Okay.
Because keep in mind, if you end up not needing treatment for those body parts, it's no big deal. But what if you do?
Right. So would it be safe to say, like, let's just say I fell on my left side. Say, okay, I fell on my left side of my body. Is that safe? Like, if in the long run, let's say my hip starts hurting?
And you would think saying the left side of your body is good enough, but it's really not. You have to list every part on the left side. So you have to mention left hip, left knee, left elbow, left shoulder.
So you have to use clear language.
You
like
have
you
to use
have
clear
to be
language.
specific. Yikes. Okay,
Yes.
okay.
And a lot of what I hear from injured workers tell me the reasoning for why they didn't list it. Number one, they say, well, I thought the doctors were going to put it in the report. I went to the emergency room. I went to an occupational medicine clinic. I told the doctors. Naturally, I thought the doctors were going to put it in the report and then I'd get coverage later. But keep in mind, occupational medicine clinics are not the best at record keeping. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And then keep in mind as well, especially with like a traumatic type of an injury, you go into the emergency room, they are going to treat what they feel is the most urgent and life-threatening injury that that person has. And they tend to sometimes forget to address the other areas that maybe are not as urgent, or sometimes they leave it out altogether. And later on down the line in the case, the insurance company again says, well, if it wasn't in the medical report, the injured worker was fine. The injured worker never
didn't say
mentioned it.
anything. That totally sucks.
Number two, the second reason sometimes that an injured worker leaves out as many body parts as was injured and they leave it out of the DWC-1 is because, again, with like more traumatic type of injuries, where someone, for example, falls off a 2-story building, a lot of times the adrenaline and the inflammation in the body doesn't allow the injured worker to pinpoint and know like what exactly was injured. So they might only feel aches and pains to their back, but they don't realize that maybe their legs were impacted, or the hip was impacted, or the neck was impacted. Sometimes when the inflammation, swelling, and adrenaline, kind of goes down a few days later, now they start to feel, hey, I'm feeling,
new pain in my
shoulder that I didn't have on day one, but now that it's hurting, I'm going to tell them. But because they didn't list it, or because they didn't say it on day one, and it's not on the DWC-1, the shoulder, then the insurance company says, no, that came about later. That was probably something separate and apart. It's not part of the injury.
It sucks. So what do you do in that case? What do you do if they're denying something that you legitimately know was part of the fall, but like you said, for whatever reason, the adrenaline, it didn't capture it? Is that the end of the road for that part of your body, or that's where you get yourself a lawyer?
It's not the end. However, again, some of it boils down to how truthful does the employer want to be. If the injured worker says, I'm starting to kind of feel it in my shoulder, but they don't list it, but they tell the employer, and the employer doesn't want to admit that they were told that orally, then it takes a while for it to get back in the claim. But assuming that it wasn't listed, get added into the claim, but to do so, it usually requires the injured worker to go to a qualified medical evaluator, also known as a QME.
Okay.
And that's a state doctor who will perform an independent evaluation and decide whether, based on the pain and symptoms that the injured worker presents on the day of the evaluation, and coupled with the medical reporting or diagnostic testing, that doctor might decide, yes, indeed, the shoulder and these other areas were part of these injuries and they should become part of the claim. And then a lot of times they do. But in order to get to that point, it takes several months.
Yikes, that's kind of scary. I mean, this is a lot of information just on one document. How important it is to accurately know what you're doing, to know that this is even a thing based on some of the information we have and that we've compiled with my team. And I do want to thank them as well, Erica and Patch. I have some questions for you, and these are also amazing tips. The stuff that we're sharing is, how else would someone else know this if It's not like you wake up every day. It's like, I'm going to get injured and I should know what a DWC-1 is. So is filling out the DWC-1 mandatory? I think it's safe to say
it's a requirement.
Okay, got it.
Throughout the worker.
Okay. We already said, can I get medical treatment before submitting the form?
You technically can. I mean, it might become questionable whether it was related to the work injury or not. And again, you're going to have to rely on the medical reporting by the emergency room department or occupational medicine or your primary care physician to write the right things in the report, namely stating this person is here because they said that they got hurt on the job. If they don't say that, then you're opening yourself up to it possibly not becoming part of the claim or the responsibility of the insurance. However, having said that, once you do report an injury, then the first 90 days is the time frame where the insurance company has to either accept or deny the claim. And also within that time frame, they're supposed to approve up to $10,000 of medical treatment, which could include that visit prior to filling out the DWC form. But again, it becomes questionable whether the insurance will consider that part of the claim because it was before and not after the form was filled out.
So tell me more about this pre-approval $10,000 that you have those first 90 days, I guess, in this, I don't know, investigative period if they're trying to figure out whether they want to take your case or not. What am I entitled to with these 10? What if there's so many what ifs? What if, I don't know, I had severe trauma, brain, I have to go into surgery. There is no surgery in the United States that costs $10,000 or less. Just saying. So what then?
Then you better hope that the insurance company does accept your claim and that you filled out the DWC-1 form and that the doctors are writing all of the right things in the medical reports and the employer is not going to try to fight and say that you weren't actually injured on the job and a lot of these things. So it's not a good spot to be in. But again, if you take the right steps from the get-go, from day one, then you're setting yourself up for being able to get the right treatment,
successful,
not having to pay out of pocket to these, emergency room bills, which, I have a lot of clients who they get threatened with it's being sent to collections because you can afford to pay those costs.
Speaking about threats, I think there's a very important threat that I feel a lot of injured workers face. And they choose not to report the injury or not do the DWC-1 claim form because their boss tells them, you file this, I'm going to fire you. Or I'll take care of your bills, but don't say anything. As an attorney, what do you tell injured workers?
Don't believe them. All of the injured workers that have come to me with that type of story, my boss told me, hey, tell them it happened at home.
Right.
Don't report it. Bring me the bills. I will pay them on your behalf. Every single person, 100% of the time, it backfires. A lot of times the employer might pay one bill, but then after they get 2, 3, or 4 of them, they stop or they say, I'm not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it never works out for that person, which is why they've had to come to me.
Yikes. I mean, it's coming from someone who does this for a living, guys. Did you hear that? She said almost all of the people that tell you this story, it's like because that's what they were told and it didn't happen.
It did not happen. No.
Sorry about the cussing, but it's just like, I'm excited to even bring this topic up because it's a very important step into even getting to a successful type of, case into the workers' comp system. Is there anything, I know you've been doing this for years, anything that we haven't covered right now, questions that I haven't asked that you feel an injured worker should know when it comes to the DWC-1 form and the initial steps to getting in the workers' comp system?
So, I mean, first and foremost, know that this form exists.
Yeah.
Right? You only know what you know. So if you've never had a work injury, how would you even know to ask about this?
Right.
Right. When my clients have come to me and there was no DWC-1 form and I asked them about it, they'd say, well, what's that? And when I tell them, well, it's a form that you're supposed to be given by your employer within 1 business day of you reporting the injury. And they say, well, but my employer didn't do that. So they're going to be in trouble, right? But that shows that I'm not at fault, right? But it's not going to go against me, right? Actually, not right.
Damn.
Because even though the burden is not on the injured worker to fill it out, it has a negative impact, right? Because they're probably not getting the right medical treatment, and they might even get a denied claim because the insurance company is going to say, well, the employer didn't voluntarily agree that you told them about it. They're actually telling us
the opposite.
They didn't know about it. So how do we know you actually did report it?
It becomes a he said, she said thing. And it's just like, why complicate your life?
So number one, know about the form. Number two, lawyers don't like math. Number two is fill it out as soon as you can. Okay.
Got it.
Turn it into your employer as soon as possible. But also fill it out completely with a list of all of the areas of your body that you even think were part of the injury, right? And then another point that I don't think I made earlier is be a little bit more descriptive about the actual injury and the mechanism of injury. So if you fell from a 2-story building, say that. Don't just say I fell. If you were 10 feet high on a scaffold and you fell and you hit the bar on your back on your way down and you fell face first on the cement, say that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times the doctors, they question, well, how did this happen? And why would you have an injury on your face? Why would you have an injury on your left shoulder? And sometimes where the fall was, or if they fell on grass versus cement versus dirt, that affects the diagnosis. And that sometimes that affects like the treatment plan that the doctors want to get. But certainly the explanation of how did all of these body parts get injured in this one event.
Don't try to be a macho. Don't try to be the tough person where it's like, no, it's okay. I'll be okay. No, don't.
Right. So describe it more. You kind of, your left or your right foot gets stuck in a hole. You twisted your ankle and then you fell and your whole body kind of twisted and you fell on one side. Describe that. And again, I recognize the difficulties writing all of that on 1 or 2 lines because that form is really small, but there's extra space on the page somewhere that they can probably say to, continue it on and write it on the bottom, or maybe write an extra sheet, and say, see next page or something to that effect.
Right.
To make sure that it's in there.
That's important. That's very important. So don't half-ass it. In other words, make sure you take your time to fill this form out because this is what's going to determine your eligibility for the workers' compensation system, which we already know is not always your best friend.
Also, another point, get a copy.
I was going to ask you that. How dare you win me to that question? I was going to say, do we keep a copy to ourselves?
So employers, whether they do it intentionally or not, I have certain thoughts about that. They don't always give the injured worker a copy.
Yeah.
In fact, most of my clients, they were never given a copy.
They don't even know what the employer wrote on their part.
They don't know what they wrote on their part. And so I would ask them to tell the employer, I would like a copy of that.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. So very important, guys. I know this is long-winded a little bit, but it's totally fine because there's so much information that I don't think we've ever shared this amount of information for a DWC-1 form. And I'm so happy that you were able to explain it to us in every scenario possible to truly understand the importance of how to get your case or your workers' comp claim on the right foot. You want to avoid those headaches? Then listen to everything that Yuvanna has just shared with us. I want to appreciate you for your time. I know that you've been doing this for a really long time, and sometimes this comes natural to us because it's like we constantly see it, we constantly do it, but you do not understand. For injured workers this is their first time. No, you do understand. That's why you chose this part of the law. It's just very important. And for those of you that are watching and maybe you don't have an injury, but someone you know, your husband, your son, your granddaughter, whatever, and this information is very good for them, please share the video. If you're watching us on YouTube, if you are listening to us on a podcast, make sure on the podcast app, make sure you guys also share this information. Yuvanna, thank you so much again. I hope to have you on the podcast again sometime. We need more girls on the podcast.
This was fun. Thank you for having me.
I love it. So we'll catch you guys on the next episode of WorkCom Talk. And don't forget to hit that like and that subscribe button. We'll see you guys soon. Bye.
Bye.